So let me apologize for the video coming up. I don't really want to spend another half hour talking about cranberries, but I did forget to aim one of my lights in the right direction. So we'll just call this a very spooky Halloween episode. Hey, it's Concrete. How's it going? Today I have another in my series of testing notes videos where I go over some of the available concentrates and how to use them for a specific flavor profile. So today I wanted to do something that's vaguely seasonal, with this being in autumn and all. I wanted to do cranberry, namely because there's only a couple cranberry flavors, and that's a lot easier than talking about mangoes. So still rain check on that one. But cranberries. I really like cranberry flavors. I tend to like sort of tart, interesting fruit flavors. Cranberry generally ticks a lot of those boxes for me. They're really useful as a tart accent in mixes. You see very few like cranberry forward vapes, but they actually work pretty well as a backup or supporting player. You kind of have to think of like cranberry in terms of fruit juices and stuff like that. I mean, Ocean Spray's made a living off of cranking out cranberry juice variations. It tends to go very well to sort of accentuate other fruit. It works a lot like pomegranate juice does in general. It tends to add some brightness and some vibrancy to other fruits. Another one of the sort of underappreciated aspects of cranberry, it's seasonal, but it isn't fucking obnoxious like pumpkin spice. It lets you sort of embrace some seasonality in your mixing without having, like, you can do autumn, you can do winter and all that, without having to go straight for bakeries and absolutely fucking steamrolling everything with cinnamon and cloves. It's good at sort of evoking a season without absolutely dominating a mix. So in terms of the fruits that you actually want to mix with cranberry, if you want the cranberry to kind of stand out in front, in general, you want to go for sweeter, juicier fruits. Maybe something that doesn't have like any really crazy bright flavors. They tend to contrast a little bit with a cranberry, and unless you want to sort of muddy up a mix or have too many different like points of interest in the mix, generally you want to keep the background fruit fairly subtle. I'd look at like apples and pears and grapes, the same kind of crap that they make, cranberry juice mixes out of. All that stuff works really well. I do like pineapple with cranberry, though, quite a bit. Again, that's completely contradicting what I just said about not wanting other bright fruits, but I find that the acidity of pineapple and the tartness of cranberry actually go really well together. It also works as a really good sort of tartar accent for red berries in general. Cranberry and raspberry, that's a pretty classic one, but I mean, it works okay with like blackberries, even strawberry to an extent, but again, you want to sort of avoid those super bright fruits with it. I don't see it being done a whole lot, but I actually really like cranberry with whiskey or brandy flavors. Flavor Arts brandy in particular is great with cranberry. TPA's Kentucky bourbon works pretty well with cranberry too. So if you're into cocktail stuff at all, just got some pretty good booze options. So primarily I'd suggest using it in sort of fruit mixes, those beverage mixes, stuff like that. I do think that you can work it in a little bit to bakeries. I know that ML Nikon has a cranberry and orange muffin recipe that she just put out. That's sort of a good way to use a cranberry in a bakery. I don't think you're going to go ahead and have anything with a cranberry filling, but like in terms of a dried, sweetened cranberry in a base, that's not a bad way to go. So the couple things you need to watch out for with cranberries. First off, like, even though they're just a fruit, you generally want to make sure that you're steeping your mix. TPA's Cranberry especially, there's a lot of ethyl alcohol in there. It really needs a steep. Flavorous Cranberry gets quite a bit better after a steep. A steep tends to like let the cranberry sit down a little bit in a mix, which is a good thing. I found that cranberry doesn't really work all that well with like floral flavors or woody flavors or anything like that. The sharpness there and like a floral note just kind of gets weird. It's also pretty iffy with creams, honestly. That tartness and some of the off notes from cranberries are really hard to make work with a cream base. So taking a look at some of the available cranberry flavors, I do have some criteria that I'd like to use to compare them. So again, got the cheesy rubric here. So the first one's going to be tartness. That's the defining part of a cranberry. How tart is it? Then there's texture, which is a big deal with fruit, more than people kind of let on. The texture on some of these varies wildly. So there's also sweetness overall. Again, that's another point that I find that these sort of vary quite a bit on. And then off flavors, you know, what's wrong with the flavor? What makes it not work in certain situations? After that, we have strength, which is just, you know, your general concentration, how much of this that you're going to have to use in specific applications. And then finally, the use case. So where does this cranberry work better than other cranberries? Okay, so starting off, I have Capella's Cranberry. So right off the bat, it's not a bad cranberry flavor, actually. I feel like it's a little bit darker rather than like a fresh or a tart cranberry, and it has some interesting texture that I think is going to go more for like a cooked cranberry, even like a craisin thing. So starting off on the tartness, I don't find it abnormally tart. It doesn't taste like raw cranberry or even like straight cranberry tart. Kind of feels like it's been cut with some raspberry or something that's has a lighter tartness to it. The texture up there, with a lot of Capella fruits, I tend to get a little bit of dry airiness, especially on the inhale and sort of up front on the flavor. And this kind of falls in the same camp. It starts out a little bit thin. It does have a better texture on the back end. It actually gets to be just a little bit sticky or saucy or jammy. But in general, it doesn't really have like a heavy, wet texture to it. It starts off a little thin and then solidifies on the back end, but I wouldn't call it like moist or juicy or anything like that. In terms of sweetness, I do feel like it's been sweetened a little bit. Like normal cranberries aren't sweet at all, so obviously most of the applications you're gonna have, you know, some added sweetener. This definitely feels like a sweetened cranberry, something kind of appropriate to like a juice blend cranberry or like a craisin type cranberry where there's some additional sugar. But it's not overwhelming at all. So in terms of off flavors, there isn't anything that's too unpleasant here. I do get a little bit of booziness out of this. Like it has almost a sort of overripe fruit kind of thing going on, just a little bit at the edges, but it's not that bad. It also doesn't taste like a straight ahead cranberry. It tastes a lot like there's some darker fruit back behind it. Something with a little bit more, you know, body and richness to it. Again, probably want to say like something like a raspberry or something. It's not like completely not a fit for the profile, but it does sort of drag it away from just a solo cranberry flavor. And then for strength, it definitely falls more in line with where a Capella fruit usually is. You're usually looking at like 4 to 6% as a primary flavor. And I definitely get that. I would say somewhere between 4 and 6% if you want like a strong cranberry taste. One of my issues with this is that it doesn't seem to work all that well as an accent. Like a lot of the Capella fruits, you kind of need a lot of it to get going. Smaller percentages don't really do the accent thing well. So if you were going to use it as an accent, I would use it as a heavier accent, around 3%. And then for the use case, where I would use this, where I wouldn't use another cranberry, or where I think this would excel, I think this would be a good base for like a bakery cranberry, like a cooked cranberry, something like that. I think you could make it into something like a cranberry sauce with like some liquid amber or something like that. But I think if you want to make like a bakery or like a scone or a muffin or whatever the hell with a cranberry in there, I think this is probably going to be your best bet at sort of recreating a craisin-esque experience. Next, I have TPA's Cranberry. This is a lot tartar and sharper than the Capella version. In terms of tartness, I definitely rank it pretty high. It has a very sort of like immediate, almost artificial tartness to it. It tastes like it's kind of bordering on something like a sour flavor. In terms of the texture, I feel like it's a little bit thinner. It doesn't feel like there's much body here, and there's like a certain sharpness. I think if it wasn't this tart, I'd call it floral, like it has that same kind of floral hit to it. But it seems fairly accurate to a real cranberry in that there isn't a whole lot of body. It's just like a sharp tartness right up front. And that kind of follows through into the sweetness. Cranberry by itself isn't particularly sweet. So I guess, again, it's a fit for the profile. But it doesn't really have like any kind of deep, juicy sweetness to it. There is a little bit of sweetness sort of in that tartness. But it doesn't have like a deeper, warmer, sweeter base to it. So in terms of off flavors, this is a weird flavor in a lot of ways. So shout out to TPA for having their actual like spec lists out. I know they're not 100% complete or you know, they don't give you exact percentages. But one of the things that you can learn is if you look at TPA Cranberry, it's at least 2/3 ethyl alcohol. And I feel like that kind of comes out in the vape. Besides needing like a little bit more steep time for it too, it does never kind of get over that sort of boozy edge. And at higher percentages, it tastes a little fermented and a little muddy. So it's not bad, but I would definitely sort of stay away from trying to use this as a primary flavor. And I think that's sort of reflected in the general like percentage use of the flavor. I would focus more on using this as a tart accent around like 1 to 2%, more than trying to build like a full cranberry vape around it. It just doesn't have the body to really carry that. So next I have FLV Cranberry. So FLV Cranberry, for me, the tartness here is really realistic. It's almost like a sort of tannic grape skin, kind of astringent tartness, which reminds me a lot of actual cranberries. It's one of the things that I like the most about the flavor. In terms of texture, this feels a lot like cranberry juice. It's very moist. It's very juicy. It doesn't have like a dry, like raw fruit flavor to it. It just is nice and smooth, and it has more of like a base flavor to it, which is a little unusual with FLV. Generally, their stuff's pretty heavy on top notes. I feel like this is pretty balanced. It has that juicier base, and it has those like tartar top notes to it. For sweetness, I think you can just carry through on the ocean spray theme. It does feel like about cranberry juice sweet. Not like kids' juice box cocktail sweet, but it definitely tastes like a pretty normal sweetened cranberry juice. So for off flavors, at higher percentages, it can get a little bit woody for me, kind of woody in the same way that like Flavor Arts Pomegranate has that like sort of light camphory note. It's not overwhelming or anything, and I don't really notice it too much until I'm up around 2-3%, but it tends to be accentuated quite a bit when you try to mix it with something that already has that in there. Like Cranberry Pomegranate seems like an awesome mix, but if you try Flavor Art Pomegranate and FLV Cranberry, all you're going to have is almost like a rosemary kind of warmth there and a little bit of that camphory note. It's also a bit warm for a solo cranberry juice, just because it like tastes and feels so much like cranberry juice, but the actual mouthfeel is just a little warm. You know, you expect that to be a little bit of a cooler sensation. It's a little bit of a mind fuck to go ahead and get something that warm when it seems like it should be like cooler. So the strength here is fairly versatile. I feel like it's a stronger flavor, or at least strong enough to use as like an accent percentage down, you know, under 1%, maybe like 0.5% to 1%. And you'll definitely get some of that cranberry tartness to it. Down that low, it's mostly just the cranberry tartness though. If you do start cranking it up to like 2-3%, you do get that like sort of warmer, juicier base. As opposed to the cranberry being just an accent, you can actually have the cranberry like be the base flavor and then actually put other fruit in as the accent to the cranberry, which is kind of neat. In terms of where you use this, again, I wouldn't fight the ocean spray thing, man. You have any kind of like beverage profile that needs that juicier cranberry, that is exactly what I'd use it for. I think it's going to work a whole lot better in those kind of applications. So those are going to be your main cranberries. Those are the three that you'd probably see most commonly. I think Flavor West has one, but I've never seen it for sale anywhere. I do have some wildcard cranberries because fuck it, why not? I like cranberry flavors. We'll run with it. So the first wildcard cranberry flavor that I have is TPA's Cranberry Sauce, which I couldn't find domestically, but I could find on the chef's website. So shout out to chefs. So I should probably replace the battery there. Okay, fresh batteries. Let's try that again. So I see why this isn't a big seller. Doesn't seem to have too much in common with an actual cranberry. What I do get is more of like a Swedish fish flavor. It has that kind of like lingonberry, red currant kind of vibe. The same kind of stuff from like Flavor Arts black currant, but a little bit brighter, a little closer to a raspberry. It's not bad, but yeah, that doesn't taste anything like cranberries. Tartness, there's not much. This is really much more of a candy flavor. Even in terms of texture, it actually has some of that candied texture to it. I could see it like trying to pass as cranberry sauce, like the gelatinous part of the sauce, but with that taste and with that mouthfeel, it just kind of tastes like Swedish fish more than anything else. It also doesn't help at all that it's kind of candy sweet too. It's definitely on the sweet side of things. So the off flavor should be pretty self-explanatory. Doesn't taste much like cranberry. Suppose that's an issue. It does also have some of that like red candy, almost cherry, like plasticky harshness to it. Again, I have issues with that kind of flavor, but I think it's definitely in there. In terms of strength, it's actually fairly potent. I think you could use it as an accent down around 1.5%, 2%. If you need to bring some like candy, sort of generic red fruit to things, I think more up towards like 3 or 4% is going to work better as a primary note. I do feel like it gets a little bit plasticky above that. And in terms of where you'd use this for a cranberry recipe, you probably just wouldn't. I don't think it's bad by any means. It's actually kind of fun. But it has nothing to do with cranberries as far as I can tell. So next I have a couple of cranberry blend flavors to give a shot, because if we're testing cranberries, why the fuck not? First is FLV's Apple Cranberry. I would describe this flavor as like a red apple and then some really tart cranberry in there. It's a pretty good like apple cranberry mix, except I get a pretty healthy dollop of throat hit with this one. That red apple flavor is definitely on point. The cranberry here feels like it's a lot different from that sort of ocean spray cranberry juice. It feels like they took something more out of like the TPA Cranberry page, and it's a little tartar and sharper. It also needs the same kind of steep. I'm not sure if there's alcohol in here, but it definitely kind of tastes like it. In terms of where you'd use this, I feel like it's a little bit too throaty and too harsh to actually be the primary note in a mix. But I think you could sort of stick it in a fruit mix more than anything else, or maybe like a cider that's supposed to be fresher. But I'd probably be down around like 0.5 to 1.5% with it. Like I said, it's not a bad flavor, but I'm kind of a wuss when it comes to throat hit on some things. And it's just really throaty for me to sort of use as a single flavor. And then last I have a cranberry flavor that doesn't have cranberry in the title. It's Hankson's Apple Mix. I should start with the disclaimer that this isn't much of a cranberry flavor. It is much more just that sort of autumnal, like packaged cider mix kind of vibe. There is cranberry in here though, and what it's doing is sort of adding some of that tartness back to the apple. It's actually kind of hard to pick out as a distinct note, but I think it does a lot of what you're going to want cranberry to do in that kind of like holiday cider mix kind of thing. There is a spice note in here. There's some cinnamon, maybe some other stuff in here. It kind of dries out the vape a little bit. It tastes like a powdered cider mix that you like rehydrate with hot water, and it has kind of that same powdery texture to it too. Like even if you do sort of moisten it up a little bit, you always get like that little bit of spicy dryness out of it. It's also pretty heavily sweetened, like one of those cider mixes too, which isn't bad. It fits well with the profile, but does kind of lock it into that specific profile. In terms of strength, I think it works better as a primary flavor around 3 to 4%. As an accent, it's a little bit busy for an accent. There's a whole lot going on, and so at lower percentages, you don't really get any of the nuance. It doesn't really taste bad as an accent down around like 1%, but it doesn't really bring that much to the table. And then in terms of where you want to use this when you're talking about a cranberry, like don't overthink it. If you're going for any kind of like holiday spiced cider mix, this is an excellent place to start, and I feel like you can use this and still get some of the benefits of cranberry without having to fuck around trying to adjust another cranberry flavor in the mix. So in terms of the glorious cheat sheet here, starting out, so with the big 3 cranberry flavors, for Capella Cranberry, I would use that if you're looking for a dried or a bakery cranberry. I feel like it does that better than the other ones. And again, it's kind of on the weak side. I'd probably use like 4 to 6% with it. For TPA's Cranberry, it doesn't have the body, but it does have like a really good, like bright, immediate tartness. I think working it in lower percentages in a mix, in like a busier fruit mix, is going to add a little bit of tartness and almost like bordering on sourness to to the mix, and it's going to be interesting without being dominating as long as you use it in like an accent percentage. And again, give it a little bit of time to let that alcohol settle down. So if you're going after a cranberry mix with a pretty heavy like cranberry juice beverage component, absolutely use FLV's Cranberry. It's also super fun because I think it might be their only flavor that has any color to it. It's kind of a light red, which, you know, is interesting, if nothing else. I do feel like it actually has a really good base for a FLV flavor. And so generally, like, I'd be on the high side of using it, like up around 2, maybe even 3% as that base for your juicy cranberry mix. And then shout out to Hankson's Apple Mix. If you do want to go for that apple cider with a hint of cranberry profile, just skip the cranberries and go straight for Hankson's Apple Mix. It's great stuff. So yeah, we covered cranberries. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. I hope this was useful. I'll catch you later.